The Hawks are currently 38-38 in the 8th seed in the Eastern Conference, with the Hawks trading 3 first-round picks for Dejounte Murray plus 2 first-round pick swaps. Having essentially the exact same record through 76 games is the definition of a disappointing season, especially for me, who was convinced Trae and Dejounte had a chance to claim the title of best backcourt in the league. It's important to note that the Hawks have avoided falling too badly under 500 all season, but the problem is the Hawks have been an historically average team, setting an NBA record streak of 30 straight games within one game of 500. So what happened? How did this trade not improve the Hawks more drastically? Do Dejounte and Trae not fit together? No, but it could be better. Was the coaching from Nate McMillan holding the team back? Oh, yeah. Has the three-point shooting, spacing, and overall roster construction made it impossible to run a consistent and efficient offense? Yes. Has that same roster construction compromised the defense? Of course. But all of these problems and more manifest themselves in arguably the most important portions of NBA games, the clutch minutes. The NBA defines clutch minutes as the last 5 minutes of the game, which includes fourth quarter and overtime, when the score is within 5 points. So a team can either be losing by 5, up by 5, anywhere in between. It's considered a clutch scenario. Here are 6 NBA teams and 6 net ratings in the clutch. Guess where the Hawks rank? So yeah, that's how bad the Hawks have been in the clutch. 29th, only better than the worst team in the league that's trying to lose and worse than several other tanking teams. To anyone who's watched the Hawks this season, this ranking makes sense. It's been nasty basketball when it matters most. But why? Let's dig through the data and film, drill down to the lineups in the individual player level, and identify the problems and find some solutions and hope for next season. The Hawks are 18-22 in clutch games with that nasty net rating I showed earlier, and they really aren't shooting well from anywhere on the court, particularly relative to the rest of the league. They're 7th in total rim attempts, but they're 22nd in percentage. They're 5th in total short mid-range attempts, but they're 14th in percentage. They're 2nd in long mid-range attempts, but they're 16th in percentage. And then from the corner threes, they're 16th in attempts, but they have the worst percentage in the league from the corner. And that's the area of the court where teams typically shoot their best three-point percentage. It's also notable how low their assist percentage is from 3 and on 2-pointers. I'm a big mid-range guy, but the Hawks can't attempt this many middies while shooting this poorly, considering their average opponent is taking way more attempts at the rim and from 3. The low assist percentage rates indicate that the Hawks are taking much harder shots relative to their opponents. So not only are they getting outscored on nearly every shot attempt, they're taking lower shot quality attempts nearly every time down the floor. The data shows that the Hawks are massive outliers in three-point made assist percentage and corner three-point percentage, 2 indicators of both great ball movement and overall offensive efficiency. So my question was, if the Hawks generated more assisted threes, what could I project the clutch winning percentage to be? Essentially, if the Hawks had better ball movement in the clutch and relied less on ISOs, how would that improve their overall play in the clutch? I decided to graph the data to see if I could identify any significant relationships between these outliers. As expected, the correlation is statistically significant and positively correlated between win percentage and three-point percentage, so the better a team shoots from 3, the more likely they are to have a high clutch win percentage. But I was curious to see if corner three-point percentage and win percentage were also positively correlated, and it is. And if you peep the p-value, which is less than 0.05, is statistically significant. So now I wanted to see if three-point made assist percentage and three-point percentage are positively correlated, and they are. So I built a linear regression model which shows that the Hawks win percentage is expected given the poor three-point shooting. It's essentially showing that it is statistically improbable and very, very hard to overcome terrible three-point shooting and low assist percentage in the clutch. But what if the Hawks had closer to league average assist percentage on their made three-pointers? League average is around 78%. The current Hawks assist percentage is 50%, so I took the first quartile, which was 75%, plugged it into the model to see what the resulting corner 3 percentage would be, and it was 36.49% from the corner, a sizable increase from the previous 14.29%. If the corner 3-point percentage is higher, how would that impact the overall 3-point percentage? And the model said that it would be 31.27% from 3, an increase from 27.91% and only slightly below league average. But here's where it gets interesting. We established a positively correlated relationship between three-point percentage and clutch win percentage. So what does this new three-point percentage mean for the Hawks' clutch win percentage? It bumped it all the way to 49.12%, a 4% increase resulting in 19.648 wins projected. So with 95% confidence, a 25% increase in three-point made assist percentage results in a 4% clutch win percentage increase, resulting in a near 2-win improvement from the current 18-22 record. And this is just one of many areas of improvement the Hawks can fix by simply sharing the ball more. When you ask guys to shoot threes after not being involved in the offense, possession after possession, corner threes suddenly become that much harder. A dynamic offense keeps guys engaged, generates better looks, and clearly would benefit the Hawks in the clutch. We honed in on just three-point shooting, and there are countless other variables that impact the team's win percentage, but every other aspect of the game gets easier when you share the ball. Let's dig a little further into the lineups. Over the last 15 to 20 games, it's felt like the starters coming after the bench makes a run, and immediately the offense just sucks, and we blow a lead. It's gotten to the point where I'm begging Quinn to please let the bench stay in and cook. But let's see what the data says over the full season. The Hawks have 2 lineups that have played 30 or more possessions in the clutch, and the one with the most possessions with 84 is the starters, of course. Nothing about these numbers suggests a negative 16 net rating in the clutch. But notice how low that assist percentage is on made three-pointers. though the 3-point percentage is very high at 41%. The next most used lineup has Okongwu at center instead of Clint Capella, and it's also a slightly less efficient lineup, but nothing that would make you suggest they're this bad in the clutch. It's the clutch lineups with Bogey in for JC with Onyeka Okongwu and Sadiq in for JC with the starters that's killing the Hawks. When Bogey plays in the clutch with this lineup, they're scoring 0.7 points per possession, which is 96th out of 100 total clutch lineups. Look at the overall lineup, so not just in the clutch, but all minutes played. It's a -4, so it's not a great lineup to begin with. But let's look at some 3-man units, including Bogey, to see what lineups are working. So with Dejounte and Trae off the court, with Trae, Bogey, and Onyeka on, they're plus 13.7, which is the 98th percentile. In a pretty good sample size too, with 320 possessions. With Jalen Johnson and Sadiq Bey next to Trae, Bogey, and OO, they're at plus 59.3 in 81 possessions. That's a pretty good sample size, and they're obliterating teams. Now here's something interesting though. When Clint plays alongside Trae and Bogey, the defensive rating is in the first percentile at 127.3 and a -2.1 net in 131 possessions. What stands out is the 3-point defense is really bad, where the opponents are shooting 49%. That's intriguing. When Dejounte replaces Trae in this 3-man unit, they're still at plus 9.5 net. Anytime Trae's off the court, the offense will suffer a bit. You can see this by the net rating being so much smaller when Dejounte plays with that same unit that was cooking folks by 59.3 points per possession. But because Sadiq and Bogey are such bad defenders, having strong defenders around them when they're on the court is so important. So these units with Dejounte and Jalen Johnson should be used more often. Against bigger teams, you can put JC at power forward, AJ at small forward, and that's still a plus 26.5 net rating lineup, so that's really solid. The clutch lineup with Sadiq in it is almost as bad as the Bogey lineup at 0.82 points per possession, which is 92nd. Similar to the lineup with Bogey, looking at the total possessions, this particular lineup hasn't been that efficient with a -3.2 net rating. But when you take Trae off the court and put him next to Okongwu, it's a plus 0.2 net. When you put Capella back on the court, it's a -15.5 net with Dejounte and Sadiq on the court. And this is suggesting to me that at this point in his career, Capella is struggling to make up for the lack of defense around him. So when you look at that previous lineup that's a plus 8.1 net, it's concerning that when you replace Jalen Johnson with Trae, you get a -24 net rating. So could this be due to less movement from Hunter compared to Jalen? Maybe less activity on the glass? I noticed that the offensive rebound percentage falls from 30% to 19% when Trae is playing instead of Jalen. Ultimately, I believe that Dejounte Murray just isn't a good enough playmaker to make up for the offensive shortcomings / lack of movement with Trae in. But when Trae plays with the 3-man combo of Sadiq Bey and Onyeka Okongwu without Dejounte, they're a plus 32.4 with a 141.2 offensive rating, which is a 100th percentile, and a 108.7 defensive rating, which would be the best defensive rating in the NBA. In comparison to the starters and the rest of the Hawks' most frequently used units, a lot of these hyper-efficient lineups are a tiny sample size, but the point is that there are lineups with both Bogey and Bey that are successful, and it's possible the most used combos in the clutch aren't the most effective pairings. Now, of course, coaches tend to rely on players with experience or just the starters in general in the clutch, but there are some promising units we just showed, particularly in Onyeka's case. When you look at Clint and Onyeka's numbers, particularly over the last 10 games, it's hard to not wonder what OO could do playing the majority of the center minutes. It may be time to promote him to starting center, and it doesn't necessarily mean we have to trade Clint Capella, especially if he's going to play like he has over the last 3 or 4 games. He's been dominant, like moving way quicker than I've seen him all season, and he was acting different against the Grizzlies and Pacers. And of course, his rebounding, screen setting, and rim protection is still invaluable, but the reality is for the majority of the season, his defense, especially in drop coverage, hasn't been the force it used to, and his offense doesn't have the ceiling that OO does. I'm not sure how he'd react to coming off the bench, but it's a true privilege to have 48 minutes of great center play, and that's a massive advantage for the Hawks, since very few teams can say that, so hopefully we can figure out something that works. Onyeka just offers so much more defensive versatility, and his impact on both sides of the court is massive compared to Capella this season. Give him an offseason with Quinn Snyder, fix the fouling issues, and install him as a dribble handoff hub, and this offense will explode, I promise. It's clear that Atlanta's future is heavily dependent on the 3 young guys, Onyeka Okongwu, Jalen Johnson, and AJ Griffin. And it's important to have dynamic players in multiple ways to score on the court alongside your 2 stars, and all 3 are versatile scorers, and they've all shown signs of being plus defenders, particularly Jalen and Onyeka. But the bench in general has been cooking since the All-Star break. They're first in plus minus, and efficiency has been very good, ranking 2nd in field goal percentage and 3-point percentage. They also have a 6.2 net rating, and for context, the highest bench net rating for a full season since 1996 was 5.8 by the 15-16 Spurs. Another point of concern is Hunter's reliance on Trae to be effective. Without Trae on the floor, lineups with Trae are negative 19.7 with a terrible offensive rating and an even worse 125.1 defensive rating. His unreliable self-creation and lack of creating for others causes the offense to suffer. In fact, there's only one lineup that has a positive net rating with Trae on and Trae off. To be fair though, every player on this team is demonstrably worse without Trae on the court, and that speaks to not only how incredible Trae is offensively, but the fact that Trae is the system and that there isn't any structured offense to fall back on when he sits. The fact is Trae has to be better because AJ has already proven himself as a better offensive fit, and Dre's defense hasn't been impactful enough to make up that gap on offense. And let me be clear, I'm not calling him a bum, and I really do love his game. He's an incredible off the dribble shooter, 2nd in the NBA in pull-up field goal percentage behind only Kevin Durant, but he's maximized on this roster when he cuts to the basket, shoots threes at volume, and attacks the rim. He has the tools to be a better fit, but he needs to make major shifts in his play style, similar to how John Collins has changed the way he plays. It'll be interesting to see what Quinn decides to do in the offseason. When the clock's ticking down and you really need a bucket, the ball is going to be in your best player's hands. So let's take a look at how Trae and Dejounte have performed in the clutch. Now the volume is there for both of them, especially when you look at the per 36 numbers. But it's the efficiency, especially for Trae, that leaves a lot to be desired. He is averaging 29.7 points, but on 36% from the field. Dejounte's efficiency is a lot better, particularly from 3 at 35%. But Dejounte's assist-to-turnover ratio is very concerning. Like, he's not really generating much assists at all. When you look at the advanced clutch stats, it really shows how much they've been struggling in the clutch. Trae's 56th ranked offensive ranking is around Lou Dort and Evan Mobley. Somehow Dejounte has a worse defensive rating than Trae. And Dejounte has the second worst net rating, only behind DeAndre Hunter at negative 17.2, which are 6th and 7th worst among players who have played at least 30 clutch games. Trae's assist percentage is consistent with his season average, but Dejounte's tanks from 23% to 9.2%, so he really isn't generating much movement at all. Your secondary playmaker having an assist percentage similar to Clay or Vucevic in the clutch is concerning. When you look at Trae's shot chart, you see where those inefficiencies are coming from. His rim finishing is actually pretty good, but from the short mid-range, which is around like below the free throw line to anything that's not a layup pretty much, so floaters as well, he takes 29% of his shots from there and he's shooting 32%, which ranks 39. He takes 17% of his shots from the long mid-range, which is the free throw line extended within the three-point line, and he ranks 17th with a percentage of 33%. So his efficiency is really bad on 46% of his clutch shots. Trae hasn't taken a corner three in the clutch this season, and he did have a better above the break three-point shooting percentage before the Timberwolves game, but he's shooting 33% from there, and he's taking 32% of his shots from there. Dejounte's effective field goal percentage in the clutch is a lot closer to the average, and he's been much better than Trae at the rim and in the long mid-range this season. What's surprising is his above the break three-point percentage is at 38%, which is 10th, so he definitely needs to be taking more of those. Now, I'm not saying to stop shooting these shots because both Trae and Dejounte have made big shots from these areas. And Trae's effective field goal percentage on buckets to take the lead in the fourth quarter in OT has been very good this season at around 54%. But a stagnant offense that is heavy in mid-range attempts will always mean you're taking harder shots. And when your starting guards and small forward are giving up 4 points per game in the paint in clutch games, you're not going to have a great performance in the clutch. It's just what it is. That's why it's important to look at a team like Sacramento. They also have 3 guys in the top 10 of point paints allowed per clutch game, but their incredibly efficient offense and ball movement has allowed them to overcome the defensive inefficiencies, and the Hawks haven't been able to replicate that. I compared the Hawks to the Cavs early in the video, and they've been pretty bad in clutch as well, but they're well ahead of the Hawks in the standings, despite having 2 ball-dominant guards and a slightly similar roster construction. So what's truly separating them and the Hawks? First thing is they won the games they're supposed to win against tanking/bad teams, only losing once to the Pacers for an overall record of 18-1 against the worst teams in the East. The Hawks comparatively are 13-8 versus those same teams, and that 7-game difference is massive in the Eastern Conference this year. And there are a ton of games that stand out where the Hawks absolutely should have won, losing after showboating against the Rockets, getting blown out by the Magic, and losing 3 times to the Hornets without LaMelo Ball. Garland and Mitchell haven't been phenomenal in the clutch, and Mitchell in particular has been very inefficient, shooting just 39% from the field and 29.7% from 3. The Cavs have won 52% of their clutch games with a net rating of 1.4, and their offense has struggled, but the difference is the incredible defensive pairing of Allen and Mobley. The Hawks can't rely on John Collins and this version of Clint Capella to replicate that. And when you look at the clutch numbers, it really shows that the Cavs have a 107.6 offensive rating and a stellar 106.2 defensive rating for that positive 1.4 net rating. The Hawks have a somewhat similar offensive rating at 104.2, but the defensive rating is 120.3 for that terrible net rating of negative 16.1. Ultimately, these 25 games are an evaluation period for Quinn Snyder more than anything, but the Hawks can't afford to be this bad offensively and defensively when it matters most. The positive side is I think the Hawks' fatal flaws are fixable, and I don't really feel like there's a huge talent gap between them and Cleveland. Blowing big leads and losing games you're favored in is often indicative of coaching, and I believe Quinn Snyder, given an offseason to implement his system and evaluate the roster, will drastically improve the team's reliability in the clutch. I expect there to be some roster turnover before the start of next season, because it's become clear that giving Onyeka Okongwu the starting job might be what's best for the Hawks. John Collins isn't the greatest hit if he can't hit threes consistently anymore, though he's been much better recently. And the front office and Snyder need to decide if they're going to try and build a respectable defense around Trae, or lean entirely into the offensive end like Sacramento and the 2021 Hawks roster. I know we were all super excited to hire Quinn Snyder and had high expectations for him this season, but reality is he was given a flawed roster with both a dated offensive system and ineffective defensive schemes. I'm much more excited to see what the Hawks look like next year, with hopefully AJ Griffin, Jalen Johnson, and Onyeka Okongwu more prominently featured in the offense and in the rotation, because I believe they hold the key to unlocking the true potential of this team.